Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for making it this early in the morning to a paper that has the word maximal heterogeneity in the title. You must be really aficionados to the topic if you're here now. And to make it a little bit more challenging for you, we've actually changed the title of the paper since you've seen it. This is joint work with Simon, who's here, and Avi Feller, who's in California at Berkeley. And it's a paper that's going to be a little bit heterodox compared to what you've seen these days at the CSA conference. I find particularly in two ways. One is the obvious one, it's not an experiment. The other one is that the patterns that we are going to show you today, that we believe are important, are patterns that we're not necessarily going to try to explain. So this is not a paper about mechanisms, it's a paper about seeing a different picture of the labor market with tools that we argue allow you to see dynamic patterns that are not otherwise easily visible with the standards of what we normally use. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about, loosely speaking, about inequality. You could also think of it as heterogeneity. And I don't need to convince you, presumably, that people are very interested in inequality these days. By inequality here, we mean economic inequality, which can mean earnings inequality. And in particular, we're going to argue that one of the root causes or the root sources of inequality is the labor market, and in particular, the labor market dynamics that people face. And by labor market dynamics, today I'm going to mean the stability or instability of having a job. So what we're going to do today is we're going to try to come up with a way of measuring and visualizing inequality in the chance of getting and keeping a job. And therefore, we're going to show inequality in people's attachment with the labor market. This follows recent empirical literature, which has tried to look at inequality in a dynamic sense, and in particular over people's lifetimes. There's a bunch of papers down there that I'm not going to review in detail, which have tried to say what happens if instead of looking at point-in-time inequality or point-in-time labor market outcomes, we look at people's trajectories over their lifetime. How does this change the inequality that they experience? How does mobility play a role in telling how people fare relatively to each other? Does mobility, for example, does change in employment status dampen inequality because perhaps people move up or by contrast, down the scale of earnings? So let me start with an example. This is what the last 8 years of my life have looked like, presumably also yours. They're just years there. And I have borrowed, and I should also say that I borrowed this slide from Simon, so I believe I've had the decency to actually say that that's indeed my career. I'm not going to show Simon's life. But anyway, let's see. So 2009, 10, and 11, I arguably did not have a job, not more than arguably, I was a PhD student. Then 12, 13, I had a postdoc, and then 14, 15, and hopefully if you survey me later in the year, I will still have the job at the OECD. I'm employed. This results in a string of 0 ones that looks like that. Employment is 1, non-employment, which encompasses unemployment and out of the labor force. I'm already going to say that we're not going to try to disentangle those two today. For those of you who disagree with that and want to leave the room, you can do it now. That's essentially what the string looks like, and it results in a simple metric that looks like that. This is just to say that that's all the data I'm going to use today. That and gender and education. I'm not even going to show you results by education today to cross-cut the analysis. So you're not going to see any regressions. You're not going to see any of the standard what leads what. I'm just going to show you results that make use of those simple strings of numbers. What I have on this slide, and by virtue of the title saying Ghana, I should probably say that this presentation is going to dwell on Ghana, but I'm going to try to compare it to another very different country, for which we could get long panel data, i.e. Germany. This is a long-term project where we're planning to bring in more data. It's also, I guess, an attempt to reconcile these two parallel universes I've been hanging out in over the last few years, which is my life here and my life at the OECD. This hopefully will try to bring them together or drive people nuts and cost me my job. Anyway, the transitions that you see up there are the 10 most common combinations that we observe in the Ghanaian urban household panel of people's employment history over the 8 years that we see them for. By contrast, this is all, what's the age? This is all people in our panel. So this is just over, well, it's the entire sample, so it's pooling everyone, and we have, you know, an initial sample that was representative of the population. We've observed them over the years. Yes. That's the people I'm going to constrain the analysis to. That's what Germany looks like. Sorry, I've skipped slide. And what you've seen is already, you know, a difference in the fact that between Ghana and Germany, the bottom bar, which is the one that shows maximal stability, tends to differ. Now, the key idea of this paper. We can use long panels to analyze employment dynamics. That's no news. We can do this semi-parametrically, allowing large flexibility in transition patterns, and I'm going to tell you in a minute what I mean by that. And I believe that this not only shows that heterogeneity matters, and it visualizes and it helps you get a sense of how much of this heterogeneity or inequality, so to speak, exists in the labor markets, but I think it also speaks to some important debates, some very old debates sometimes that we've been thinking about over the years, and in particular, debates that speak about segmentation, dualism, so things that have to do with the fact that different segments of the labor market, different people in the labor market experience very different dynamics. Some of them had very stable histories, some of them had very unstable histories, and we believe that trying to disentangle these and just, you know, show you a picture of how people differ in this respect, it's important because it might speak precisely to that literature. Why, at this point you might be wondering, so if it's so obvious what you're doing and it seems to ring such, you know, a classic bell in my head, you're talking about segmentation, it's no rocket science here, why has this not been done before, or what's new? What we believe is new is the fact that this method allows you more clearly to pick up the heterogeneity, the differences in these patterns in the most flexible possible way by simply looking at what people's histories look like and without imposing any parametric structure on the problem. So one example that I'm not going to go into detail is precisely the one about segmentation. We know that segmentation matters for a number of reasons, and I'm going to argue that segmentation is ultimately something that has to do with differences in the probability that people keep jobs, and that's the high H that has appeared in this statement by Blanchard and Landier, and in the probability that people get a job if they don't have one, and that's G, and I'm going to go and define it in a second. So our contributions, we essentially do what I've just said, and we do it with new data, long panels, with new identification results that we base this work on by Browning and Caro 2014. And, you know, it's obviously highly demanding on the computational side, and it's probably stuff that could not have been done before fast computers were, were around. Now, what do we find? We find substantial inequality that is not necessarily visible once you look at standard models of this labor market, and by that, I loosely speaking want you to think about things like dynamic probates. So if I were to look at this transition process from year to year using a simple dynamic probate, I would not be able to see the same picture. I see a different one, and it's not obvious how one speaks to the other. You shouldn't, I'll go into detail as to what that means. But what I'm going to say is that the dynamic probate gives you a very partial picture of what's going on. And what we find is that heterogeneity differs substantially across countries. I'll tell you in what way. For those of you who need to see purpose and a light at the end of the tunnel, I'm also going to promise you that this is actually useful for doing things like labor market reform evaluation, so to speak, and in particular to look at how such reforms have heterogeneous effects for different parts of the labor market by changing their dynamics of transition between employment and unemployment. Unfortunately, we won't get to discuss this more exciting part today. Very, very quickly on the data. That's the long-term plan. Those are the countries that we have data for and we would like to eventually put in this analysis. Today I'm going to just focus on Ghana and Germany. These are the samples that we're going to look at. Germany and Ghana today. Germany is the SOEP, the German Socioeconomic Panel dataset, and Ghana is the CSAE, Ghana Urban Household Panel. How does this model look like? So, Suppose that for every single worker, G is the probability of getting a job if you don't have one, and H is the probability of keeping it. Following Browning and Caro, we assume that each respondent, and this is very much the spirit of mixture approaches, mixture models, not only has a certain probability, but that probability varies by the type that the respondent belongs to. So each respondent has a certain type that defines how these probabilities G and H are, that has a certain probability G and H. The conditional likelihood for this problem then looks like the sum of those probabilities weighted by the probability that each type, theta, shows up in the population. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit more parametric structure on this problem, hence the semi-parametric in the title, which is that these functions are actually going to be solely a function of age in addition to type. So when I said that I wasn't going to use any data, I was speaking to an earlier version of this project. We've now parameterized age. So I guess I was lying in that little respect. But that's all we need, I promise you. There won't be anything else other than age. We estimate this in a Bayesian framework, and we do this by assuming an initial distribution of types, backing out model parameters, then simulating the distribution again, and using Bayes' rule to update the types that we get, and the model. And by the way, I should say that what we're going to do is impose that in this particular data, there exist 8 types. Why do we come up with 8 types? It's not just a number we've imagined. It's due to the identification results we owe to Browning and Caro, who essentially show that given a certain T, there is a certain number of types that you can identify. And this 8 is just below the number of types that can be identified for the kind of T's, which is 7 to 8 in the data that we're using. Diagnostics show good convergence. I feel like I should say that because that's the part where we actually had some additional details, but then our statistician friend Avi said, don't worry guys, they converge. When a statistician says don't worry, we don't worry. Anyway. What does all this ramble lead to? Well, first of all, I want you to get the sense of what I'm going to show you looks like. Essentially, at the end of this game, we're going to end up with an estimate space, a parameter space, that looks like that. It looks like a combination of G and H's, the probability of getting a job if you don't have it, and of keeping a job if you have it, the first is G, the second in H, over people's lifetimes. We're going to do that with something called spaghetti plots. From an Italian in the team, you could expect no less. And you will see these estimates in 3 different colors that should stick to your mind as 3 different ages. Age 20 for red, age 40 for blue, and age 60 for, and green the other way around, and green for age 60. Anyway, you got the sense. So let me show you what this looks like. This is what our estimates look like in this GH space. On the left, you see Germany. On the right, you see Ghana. For explanatory purposes, given that, this is still obviously very preliminary and I want to get a feeling from you of what, you think about this, I just zoomed in on women, and I'm just going to talk about that. And what these pictures show are, first of all, those contour plots that you see tell you the densities at age 20, 40, and 60 of the different types that exist in the, the density of the estimates for G and H that we see in this space. The little points, actually, the little numbers tell you the mass attached to those estimates. So, for example, a 0.5 tells you that 50% of the mass at a given color, i.e. at a given age, lies within that space. The spaghettis, so the little lines, tell you what each individual that we can simulate out of this distribution of G and H that we have estimated looks like in this space over their lifetime. So while the contour tells you at a point in time, i.e. 20, 40, and 60, where people are located, the spaghetti tell you how people move, if you will, between one point in their life, starting at 20, going to 40, and from 40 to 60, to the next. What is this picture telling us? Well, if you bear with me for a moment, I'm going to interpret this picture by saying a couple of things. First of all, that the Ghanaian labor market seems to be more fluid than the German one. By fluid, I mean that as people age, they do progress towards having a higher attachment, so a higher H, they go upwards in this graph. But while in Ghana, they go to very, very high H's, while in Germany, they go to very, very high H's, they almost hit the one bound at the top. In Ghana, they don't quite reach the same level, and in fact, as they age, as they go from blue to green, they come back towards a lower attachment in the sense of lower H, lower probability of keeping a job if they have it. It's also more fluid because in Ghana, as opposed to Germany, women, as they go from young age to prime age, they have a higher probability of getting a job if they don't have it. Whereas in Germany, the G front doesn't change very much. So it seems like, there is more in and out in Ghana as opposed to Germany. The other thing that this method allows you to look at, and that's not obvious from other methodologies, is that you can look at how the bubbles are distributed in the space, and therefore, at loosely speaking, how heterogeneous these labor markets are. And in particular, I'm referring to the fact that in Ghana, there is a bottom left bubble, the people located at very low G's and very low H's. So these are people that lose a job if they have it very easily and very hardly get one, that does not simply exist in Germany. And this type of heterogeneity is something that you will not see otherwise, and obviously, we're still struggling with how you describe it and, in a sense, condense it to information that is amenable to being summarized easily, but essentially, in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to show you that this inequality, I started from inequality, you can call it heterogeneity, that exists in one country does not exist in another in ways that we think it's quite interesting. Now, there is actually one way of summarizing this in a little bit more intuitive way, which is to look at the probability of employment at different stages in people's lives that results from these probabilities of keeping a job and of getting one if you don't have it. Because, you can simply compute the probability of keeping a job at a given point in time as the product of all these objects that we've estimated. And what does this, give? It gives us something like that. Something that, if it doesn't make it in an economics paper, I'm going to push Simon to at least have a shot at the Tate Modern, because I think, it's pretty beautiful, I find. What is this? This is the probabilities that people are employed at different points in their lifetimes in Ghana for men on the left and women on the right, estimated by means of this approach that gives you heterogeneity in the parameter space that I've shown you before. What does it tell you? It tells you, first of all, that there is a lot of heterogeneity that simple models don't pick up, and I'll tell you in a second what I mean by that. And it also tells you that it's more heterogeneous for women than it is for men. The same is not true in Germany, where both men and women are much higher up in this space, and they tend to be more attached to this labor market. I'm going to speed up. And I'm going to tell you that if you were to run a simple logit of this same problem, this is what that graph would look like. Which does not need, I'm going to say this, just as a caveat, should not be necessarily interpreted as an average of what I've seen you before. The two are not, interpretable in that way, but this gives you a clear sense of in what way the heterogeneity that exists in the previous graph is swamped away by a simpler approach. Finally, where we're driving at with this is hopefully trying to find a way of condensing this information in something that people understand in a more intuitive way, which is estimated these parameters, G and H, can we look at actually measures of inequality in this space? And the chief measure of inequality is a Gini coefficient. So we have a Gini coefficient that we can calculate out of this, and it's not a Gini coefficient in the standard sense of a Gini in measured variables, it's going to be a Gini in estimated parameters. And it's going to be a Gini that is going to also have implicitly a confidence interval around it, because we can simulate out of this distribution, taking different samples, calculating Gini every time, and looking at how the distribution looks like, and it's going to give us figures like that. Two things to notice here. One is that in Germany, as opposed to Ghana, inequality, this is G, in the probability of getting a job if you don't have one, increases with age, whereas in Ghana it stays much more constant with age, and that inequality, it's generally higher in this respect in Germany than it is in Ghana. So the experiences that people have in this labor market in terms of the likelihood of getting a job tend to be more unequal in the German labor market than in the Ghanaian labor market. I don't know what we make of this. Maybe Ghanaians have generally more fluid experiences or more unstable experiences throughout their lives, whereas in Germany this tends to different across life and gives you this pattern. Much less action in age, the probability of keeping a job. In conclusion, what have I tried to do today? I've tried to showcase essentially a tool to visualize and summarize inequality in labor market experiences. You can read inequality there as heterogeneity as well. This method will be useful potentially to address debates on segmentation and dualism to the extent that this, and we're working on that at the moment, this problem can be reduced to be indeed one about simply looking at how people look in this space and how much heterogeneity there is in this space, and we need to do a little bit work on that front. And then, as I said, we're hoping to do some heterogeneous drift effects evaluation of some reform, in particular one that took place in Australia a few years ago. The results I've already told you about, I need to go through them again. There's substantial heterogeneity that differs a lot across countries, and the next steps I've just described are up there. So hopefully more on segmentation and more on the use of this kind of approach to analyze policies. Thank you.
Okay. So is this the right distance? Yes. Okay. So it seems like there are two kind of discussants: the people who name the presentation after themselves, and the people who name the presentation after the person they are discussing. And so we didn't match, and there are two Falco discussion on the thing. This is Falco discussion. I'm discussing Falco. Well, thank you, Paolo. This was a very interesting paper. And in the interest of time, I will just have a few comments. I have a couple of comments in terms of placing this in the literature and what the use of this method that you developed is, and a couple of more semi-technical comments on the methods. My first comment is, okay, so your pitch is really about inequality. So then when I see the paper and see the slides and the presentation, then my first question is, what kind of inequality are we talking about here? And possibly an older generation would immediately agree with the first point on your slides: inequality is a labor market phenomenon. But the newer generation, like the people who are doing the masters now, they think inequality is all about RNG. So like the inequality that we care about is the fact that people have capital returns that are way above labor returns. It is not really a shortcoming, but it's, in a sense, it's something that you may want to make clear at the beginning, that that's not the kind of inequality you're talking about. So the 1%, the Occupy Accra movement wouldn't be really looking at these things, because they would be concerned with the fact that a few people are getting big money from, say, oil rents and so on. So that's the first qualification, to more like a positioning. Inequality among workers. So on top of it, this is not just about inequality among workers, it is inequality on the extensive margins of having a job or losing a job. Well, losing a job, or of getting into employment and out of employment. And again, in earlier literature, we've been more concerned with inequality in incomes or inequality in wages. So things more the intensive margin once you have a job. And so you'll hear people complaining about how the median wage in the US has stayed flat, in real terms across the last 30 years, while wages in the top quantiles of that distribution have increased. Whereas here, really, what we are focusing on is this debate, this inequality with extensive margin, and I think you have good reasons to do that. So there is a new series of papers by Suprit Kaur, for example, and she argues that because of social norms, then many labor markets experience what is called wage compression. So people with different marginal productivity of labor end up earning the same amount in the labor market, and because, I can see you're about to raise a red card, and because of this wage compression, what we find is that employers have to respect the social norms, so they have to offer wages that are similar to people that work in their firm, but they may start discriminating with career incentives. So really, whilst we've been thinking a lot about inequality in terms of wages, this inequality in terms of probability of getting or losing a job is becoming more and more compelling, also because of these new findings in the micro-literature on labor markets. And finally, this is not just inequality on the extensive margin, this is really about transition probability, so changing across states. And in this sense, I think, and this is my last point on the literature, it will be interesting to flesh out a little more how your method compares with what sociologists have been using for years, this method to capture transition matrices in intergenerational and within generation mobility. So that's I guess, the kind of reference, the literature that I think of when I see this presentation. You know, Chetty has just published a paper in the QJE studying these kind of topics in the US, so really I think that's where you want to anchor. So how do you speak to that literature? What I think is particularly promising about this method is that it gives us a good tool to describe labor markets, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, which have proved surprisingly more dynamic, and certainly more dynamic than we originally thought. So many of us saw Chris Blackman and Stefan present the results of their experiment here at CSA 1 year ago, and we always thought that the labor markets with high unemployment would also be labor markets that were fairly static, where people would stay for a very long time in job queues, and the moment they get jobs, they just stick to them no matter what. And actually what we are finding more and more is that turnover rates are particularly high. So I think that's really the value of this method that is going to help us understand a bit more what the impact of policies is on this more subtle aspect of the labor market. That's for me, I guess, right, Paolo? Yeah. Okay. So, anyways, wrapping up, I have a couple extra points, and then we can talk about it more in depth during coffee. I think it will be important to distinguish about job types. At the moment, like you just have a job or don't have a job, but a lot of what you are talking about also in your presentation is these ideas of duality and so on, and that's what is going to come up a little bit in future, in other presentations in this session. So really, that distinction would be particularly important. I think it would be good to do some model validation. So for example, you estimate the model using n-1 years. To what extent do the patterns you see in year n, are they consistent with what your model would have predicted, or the people who you predict will be under the highest risk of leaving employment, are they those who leave their jobs? So I think that will be very important. And also I was wondering, you fix the number of types, and that has an identification justification. I was wondering whether the amount of inequality you end up measuring is sensitive to the number of types you allow your model to capture.
Okay. Well, as I think we've eaten pretty much into all our time, I'm not sure we should, I mean, if there is any burning question, we can maybe take one, but I'm sorry we went a bit long, so I don't want to impose on your time. Otherwise, I'll just address Stefano's concerns. Yes?
Yeah, if I understood correctly, so you are somehow assuming something on the number of types, so that's an assumption that would affect the amount of heterogeneity that you want to import in the model. So, but I'm not sure how this would be, how restrictive this could be compared to a completely parametric approach where you assume some functional distribution, or functional assumption is about the distribution of the whole parameters in that model. Or is it because you don't want to you don't want to get identification from functional form assumptions.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, I guess I can take that and relate it to Stefano's last point. So, yes, indeed, the spirit of this is indeed to keep the parametric structure as small as possible. The reasons that I don't think that assuming the number of types gives us the results is that essentially if you add more types beyond what's identified, what this model is going to do is essentially split the mass between types, but essentially it's not going to tell you any more than that. It's just, you know, the space, I mean, I believe that still within those contours, you're going to be able to see the same density. It's just going to split it between smaller points between these contours, but the broad picture isn't going to change because the model isn't able to identify more. I mean, another way of seeing it is that there's no point in adding types if you know from Browning and Cairo that, you know, you're not, you know, they're just going to carry the same amount of information. Okay, so I think we can probably move to the next paper. Thank you very much. Is it? They should be already on the desktop. Oh, and by the way, I should have thanked Stefano for some great comments, and you know, I agree with all of those, and we can discuss them later.
All right, so let me start. And I've got 50. Will you?
Yes, I'll give you the 10 and the 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming. So today I'm going to present a paper which is joint work with Guillaume Abebe, Marcel Fachamp, Paolo Falco, Simon Franklin, and Simon Quinn, and all of them are here in the same room. So, and I don't think we'll have I'll have many other opportunities to present the paper in front of all of the co-authors at once. But yes, and everybody. So this is a joint project between the University of Oxford and EDRI. Many of the people also moved to other destinations, but originally we were a team here at the University of Oxford. So what is this paper about? Well, in this paper we evaluate 2 job search assistance programs. So we ran a large randomized trial with 4,000 young unemployed Ethiopians, in particular just in Addis Abeba. And we combine this randomized trial with the usual baseline and endline data collection, as well as with a high-frequency survey where we track responded using phone calls throughout the duration of the study. What we offer to study participants is one of 2 programs. We offer a transport treatment, which is basically a transportation subsidy, so it's the amount of money calibrated to cover the cost of a trip from your place of residence to the center of town in selected locations where we know this is where job seekers go to look for jobs. So this is the first program, is a transport subsidy. And then we also offer what we call a job application workshop, which is a slightly more nuanced program that consists of 2 components. So it has a certification component where we invite job seekers to take a number of standardized personnel selection tests. We certify their performance in this test, and we produce certificates that certify their performance in the test. So it's as if we are giving job seekers an extra signal to signal their employability to employers, to signal their skills to employers. So that's component number 1, and as well a second component which is about orientation, so helping job seekers to make effective job applications. And so here we give them some information on how to prepare CVs, cover letters, how to perform interviews. So this is not about getting information of how you hear about a vacancy, but it's about basically once you know of a vacancy and you need to apply for this position, what do you do? Trying to make that transition more effective. These interventions are designed to address spatial and informational constraints to employment. So these are the 2 big constraints that we've got in mind. Why is that the case? Well, we know that this is the century of cities. Urban rates are picking up in many developing countries, and in particular Africa. They used to have a comparatively low urbanization rate. Even Africa has joined this trend, and now cities are growing in Africa as well. So we are going to have a number of very large cities, generally more urban countries going forward, and more and more mega cities, okay? And mega cities are not necessarily very pretty places, but they can look a little bit like this. Managing this growing urban labor market is really one of the big challenges that as development economists we'll have to face in the coming years. One of the things that is difficult about managing these big sprawling markets is the fact that they are ridden with search costs, with frictions, right? And this friction will be especially taxing for the poor. In particular, we have two types of frictions in mind. I thought those two would also become blue. One is the cost of transport. So transport is expensive as the city grows larger. Poor people, sometimes migrant, they tend to live in the outskirts of town, and jobs are typically found in the center. This is certainly the case in Addis Ababa. As you've seen here, this is a job information board where people read about vacancies that are available in town at that moment, and all the job boards are located in the center of town, as well as the major centers of employment. So really, if you want to look for a job, what you need to do is travel to these places. And traveling is expensive. Now, Simon Franklin, who's also here in the audience, who's done a separate paper about this. He estimates that a poor job seeker who's searching for a job can spend up to a quarter of his weekly expenditure on job search. So this is a very large category of expenditure, okay? So transport is the first barrier. And we also worry that the second type of constraint that we want to think about is information. So we know from a lot of research that it's actually quite difficult for workers who are poorly attached to the labor market to signal their worth to potential employers. So these are people who have, we don't have much previous experience, and so may not have reference letters and so on to signal the skills that they've got. We also know that active labor market policies have had some limited success in developed countries, right? So there is a meta review by Card, Klug, and Weber that shows that actually, in particular, programs that help job seekers look for jobs consistently had showed positive short-term impacts in a number of rich markets where they were attempted. So what do we find? Well, we find that these two interventions that we offer, this job application workshop and the transport subsidy, they do help individuals get better jobs. Some of these effects are rather large. So we find, for example, that the workshops increases the likelihood of permanent employment by 6 percentage points. That's over a mean in the control group of about 18%. So that means that we are increasing the probability of working in a permanent job by about a third. We also find the impacts are stronger for groups that typically don't fare very well in the labor market. In particular, job seekers with low education attainment. In this sample, it will mean people who only have a high school degree and no further qualification, as well as women. We find that these two interventions operate through different mechanisms. So while the workshop operates mostly through the margin of search efficacy. So basically, people don't search harder and don't seem to be searching for different jobs. However, they become better at converting job applications into job offers. So they get more job offers per job applications that they put in. So that's for the workshop. And for the transport intervention, we find, in fact, impact on both search intensity and search efficacy. So the transport intervention is releasing a financial constraint, so it's allowing people to invest more in job search, and it also has some impact on these conversion rates. Finally, our last result will be that we find that interventions help relax spatial and informational constraints. So we have some evidence, not just about these reduced form impacts, but about more structural, if you want, changes to the labor market that occur once you allow once you increase the financial resources available for search, or once you increase job seekers' ability to signal their skills, right? And we'll see in particular how there is a certain spatial heterogeneity in occupational structure that is weakened by our intervention, as well as you'll find that basically the market is going to be able to start pricing, putting a return to some of these skills once job seekers are offered the job application workshop. So let me jump, in the interest of time, I'll just talk quickly about the experimental design, no further context. The results, then discuss a little bit this last point about the spatial and informational constraints that we're addressing, and then conclude. So the first intervention is the job application workshop. Okay, and this is really designed to lower information barriers to hiring. As I said, it involves two components. There is we run the standard personnel selection test, and then we run this orientation session to help job seeker make effective job applications, which really covers how to make a CV, how to prepare a cover letter, how to perform in interviews, and crucially, how to use the certificates that we produce with the personnel selection test in part 1 of the intervention. This treatment is provided for free and is implemented by a local academic institution. So a lot of people worry that basically some of the signals that economists provide they're really not credible, because either that or there are Hawthorne effect if you put a big Oxford University stamp on the information that you give. Here we're working with the local institution that firms are already using to screen prospective applicants, so really this enhances the external validity of the funding. The test that we run is a test of cognitive ability, the Raven matrices. I'm sure most of you have seen it before. A test of linguistic ability in Amharic, so we don't test English here. A test of mathematical ability, and finally work sample test. Now the idea came after doing some qualitative work with the firms, because we realized that some of the firms were not really so we asked them about what kind of information they would want to see about the workers that they hire, and we proposed a number of tests. Now there is a big literature on non-cognitive skills and so on, and we found the firms would have had problems interpreting this information. What they really wanted to see was performance on the job tasks. So here we create a number of standardized tasks, like listening to a recording of a business meeting, taking minutes, and then answering questions about what people discussed in that meeting, or data entry and so on, and we certify people's performance in these tasks. This is the first intervention. The second intervention is the transport treatment, which again, as I said, is a treatment that is designed to lower transportation costs that may prevent effective job search for poor job seekers. This is in the form of a subsidy that is available for collection at a central location in the city. So this is a place close to the job boards that I showed you in the second slide, where job seekers typically go to look for jobs. And it's calibrated to cover the cost of a single return trip to the center. So ideally, this kind of self-targeting, you're not going to save unless you want to trek all the way on foot, basically just reaching the center and going back. You're going to spend as much money as you collect at the center. The median duration of the treatment is for about 6 weeks. We randomly stagger start and end date to generate some additional variation. And a number of you, I'm sure, will have seen the paper by Simon Franklin. And what Simon does is he administers a very similar treatment in Addis to a different population. So this is, in fact, Simon at the end finds results that are very similar to ours. So that confirms, that gives further validity to these findings, but so that this is how to think of these two results next to each other. So we work with an average draw of the unemployed people that you can find just by going from house to house and asking who's unemployed, whereas Simon is working mostly with a sample of workers that were sampled at the job boards. So this is a subset of the population of job seekers with, say, high motivation. So this is a cluster, we randomize at the level of clusters, so we sample a number of clusters across the city. This is Addis. You can see in red where the jobs are found. In purple, violet, these are the clusters that we sample, and the blue is the population, right? So you see this central concentration of jobs, population be scattered around, and us sampling from all the outskirts of town. And what we will do is we'll assign cluster to either the transport, the workshop, or the control condition. And in the transport and workshop condition, we also randomly allocate people to treatment and control. So we'll have control individual in pure clusters, as well as control individuals in treated clusters to measure spillovers. Okay? Not, of course, if you're worried about general equilibrium effect, unfortunately, we won't be able to capture those with this design, but at least at the local level of these geographical clusters, we're going to be able to see whether there are any positive or negative impacts on the job seekers next door. Just a few tests. We use stratification and re-randomization, so we have very good balance. We also have very good attrition. So we have an attrition rate of 6.4%, which is fairly much lower than comparable studies in urban East Africa that you may have seen in recent years. And it doesn't differ by treatment status, transport or workshop. So let me jump to the results. We follow a full pre-analysis plan that is registered there. We'll run a simple ANCOVA specification where we'll study the effect of on a number of outcomes, why they are pre-specified in the plan, using We regress that on intervention dummies, transport and workshop. There is also treatment 3 and treatment 4. This is a job fair treatment that we don't discuss in this presentation, that we'll have a separate paper about. But so that is part of the same study. We'll also have dummies for being in the spillover group, as well as the value of the outcome at baseline, right? So this is an ANCOA specification. For inference, we correct standard errors at the geographical cluster level. This is the level at which we administer the intervention. And we are concerned about the fact that we are running multiple comparisons, so we will present both p-values as well as q-values that correct for the false discovery rate, considering the number of hypotheses we are testing. So what do we find? This is a battery, these are the 7 key outcomes that we specified in the plan. So we want to know, do treated job seekers, are they more likely to work? In general, are they more likely to have permanent work? Do they work longer hours? Do they have higher earnings? Are they more satisfied with their job? Do they work in jobs with a written agreement, which really is a proxy for formality? Are they self-employed? Right? And so what we find, so that's the second row there, is that individuals in the workshop group, in the job application workshop group, are 6.7 percentage points more likely to work in a permanent work than people in the control group at end line, right? And that effect is robust to the multiple comparison correction, so it's got a Q-value of 0.005. There are some effect of the transport intervention on that variable, about 3 percentage points, that then don't survive the multiple hypothesis test correction. We also find that formality goes up. So we have a 5 percentage point increase now from both interventions on the likelihood of working with the written agreement, our proxy for formality. And this is a fairly large effect because the mean for the control group is about 22%. Okay, so roughly a quarter increase in the probability of being in a formal job. Where are these impacts coming from? Well, as I said before, so these impacts are concentrated on job seekers that have low education attainment. So here we split the sample by whether the job seekers have only high school plus vocational, or high school plus other post-secondary degrees, like full degrees and so on. And what you can see is that in fact, all impacts are coming from the high school only group. And this is a permanent work outcome variable, and you can see that for this group, in the screening or workshop treatment, the probability of having a permanent job goes up by 10 percentage points, which is almost a doubling of that probability compared to the baseline. Similarly, if you break it down by gender, what you'll see is that a lot of the impacts are concentrated on women. So in particular, the transport treatment here, this probability of getting a permanent job creates almost a 7 percentage point significant increase in the probability of working permanent work for women, and has no impacts at all on men. And these two effects are statistically different from each other. The job application workshop here has similar effects. For the formality variable, also there we see some gender differences. So how do these results come about? We help people to get better jobs. How did this come about? Did people search more? Did they search differently? Or did they decide to accept different jobs? Right. So in order to address these questions, we use this high frequency data that we've got. So we track, as I said, we have this phone survey tracking respondents every fortnight from the beginning to the end of the study. And that, skipping the econometrics, basically allows us to get an estimate of the treatment effect for every fortnight. And we can then plot them in these nice graphs, although of course they're not as nice as the spaghetti plots of Paolo. And what you can see by doing this exercise is that this is the probability that you've done any search in the previous fortnight, that goes up just after the intervention starts. I probably have a pointer myself. For the transport intervention, and in fact it stays put for the workshop. Okay, so the transport, as you'd expect, is relaxing a financial constraints. People now have more resources to search more intensely. The workshop is not having a commensurate effect. Do they then search more effectively? We compute these ratios of number of offers per number of applications you put, and what we find is that, again, so this is broken by educational category, and what we find is that both the workshop as well as the transport increase search efficacy. So there is an effect on the number of offers that you get per applications. You get more offers per applications that you do. Do they change the reservation wages? Are they looking for different jobs? I won't show you any results, but we've run a bunch of tests and we don't find any evidence of that. So really, this is about search intensity and search efficacy. So just to conclude, let me show you two last slides, and then I don't need to summarize the results again because I've presented only a few. You may wonder, okay, fine, we saw these results, but what constraints have this intervention relaxed? You said at the beginning that you wanted to target spatial and informational constraints. Have this intervention really operated through a relaxation of these constraints? And the first slide that I want to show you is this slide that shows a certain flattening of space. What do I mean by that? So here we are plotting using local polynomial smoothing the relationship between the distance from the center of town and the probability of being in self-employment. The green line is a control group, and what you see that increases almost linearly as you get farther and farther from the center of town. So there is an effect of distance on occupational structure. The farther away you are from the center, the more likely you are to be in self-employed. Now the blue dotted line is the same probability for the people in the transport intervention, and you can see that that is flattened. So this is some evidence that we are operating through spatial constraint because we are kind of getting rid of this spatial influence on occupational choice. Similar story for the second intervention, the job application workshop. So here we are using the test scores, and we are correlating the test scores with the things that could be observable in a CV, like your work history. And with that, we use a predicted test score. Now here I'm restricting the analysis to individuals who only have a high school degree. The blue line is a control group, again is a local polynomial here. And what you see is that for control group individual, there is no relationship between this predicted test score, so something that is capturing the observable component of skills, and for example, the probability of working in a permanent work is flat. The market is not putting a price on these observable skills. And what you find is that for the workshop group, that line becomes steep. So now the market is putting a price on the skill. People with the skills are reaping a return. All right? So we do have some evidence that really these interventions are operating through spatial and through space and information. So just to summarize, we found that our two interventions help people get better jobs, so in particular more permanent jobs and more formal jobs, and that this is operating through different mechanisms. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Engida from Addis Ababa University, PhD candidate. So my observations, basically, I divide into two. One is the positive aspect, which is they focused on the pressing problem that Ethiopia has been facing at present time. So unemployment is a serious problem. The gap between registered and employed job seekers is very wide. If we take, for example, the second largest city where I have been working, so from registered job seekers, those who got the job are less than 10%. This clearly shows that the issue is quite pressing. So the other important issue is they made rigorous analysis to help inform policies in areas of employment, labor market, etc. Issues that need further consideration, in my view. The first question is, what should come first? Is it addressing the job shortage or assisting in job search? When I weigh these two, Ethiopian economy is not in a position to create adequate jobs. So we can talk about assisting in job search when job is available. But when we see the problem is a shortage of jobs, therefore, how do you see this one? And some economists criticize Ethiopian economic growth for the last some 10 years. Though it is impressive, but it is criticized for being jobless growth. Therefore, how do you see this issue? The other issue is, it seems urban biased or mega city bias element is observed here. Regions are not included and the rural areas are not included, yet the problem is rampant in regions and rural areas as well, because many graduates are joining the labor market annually. Many are graduating from many universities, we have many universities. So the problem is, in my observation, more serious in rural areas and the regions than in Addis, because people in Addis have better opportunity or access to information and also jobs than in other areas. Therefore, this is another issue. Well, the other issue is the government is encouraging self-employment than simply searching for jobs. This is a policy. Again, how do you see this? If we are assisting people to search for jobs, so that is employment, but self-employment is highly encouraged by the government. It is a policy issue, and yet you are trying to help them to get jobs. So the other issue, last one, is, in my view, getting jobs might be associated in some way or another with attitude as well as self-esteem. People with positive attitude, people with better self-esteem can make better decisions and can take better actions, and then they may end up getting jobs. So how did you treat that in your workshops, for example? So that the workshops could capacitate them, and then they will be more confident, their self-esteem increased, and they will perform better, at least in like interviews, in job interviews, and finally get the job. So these are my observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think in the interest of time, I'd rather take a number of questions and then I'll address everything.
Sure. Start. Yeah, I've seen all of you.
Thanks very much. I'm not sure if I followed exactly how you're estimating these spillovers, but I wanted to ask you a bit more detail about these. Sure. Essentially with respect to, do you have exogenous variation in the intensity of treatment? And what I'm worried about is compliance is voluntary in a situation, and so if I'm from a cluster where many people comply, then presumably the spillovers are going to be larger for me. So I guess like what I'm thinking of is this paper by Crepon and Duflo, where they kind of have a two-stage randomization where they randomize the intensity of treatment. So can you speak a bit more about that, please?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh.
I'm there.
So thank you very much. It's really an exciting issue, and I've just a couple of questions. The first one is, did you ask them about networks? Because perhaps the transportation could work through network effect. These are relatively high school graduates, right? So much of the effect is in this category. So perhaps they come to the city to meet friends, potential employers, and if you have this data, I mean. The second one is, did you observe differences in salary between the control and treated group when they were employed after the training or after the interventions? Thank you very much.
Is that all, or Francis?
I just wanted to check that I got that. You've changed the probability of employment, but you don't change earnings. Is that right?
Say it again. You change the probability of employment.
You change the probability of having a permanent job, but you don't change earnings. Is that right?
That's right. That's correct.
So what you've done is you've shifted them.
That's correct.
So what do you want to infer?
Can I? Okay. Well, okay, let me just start with that one. And so, in fact, that is gone. So we don't find, we have small positive coefficients on earnings. So in fact, that kind of addresses both questions. There is no, if you look among individuals in the control group, you don't find a sizable earning premium for having a permanent job.
Exactly.
So,
Permanent jobs.
well, so that I would, exactly because of what Paolo and Simon were presenting, there is both an intensive as well as an extensive margin. And what we're working on at the moment is integrating across all post-treatment periods and finding whether basically the fact that you spend less days in unemployment because you are in a permanent job, that actually has economic returns. We're doing their analysis, so I don't have the final figures, but it does seem that there are at least qualitatively some positive effects in that dimension. It's not something that you capture in a cross-section. There is no return in terms of earning more in a particular week. There is, of course, a return if you think about a stream of income that is in one case stable, in the other case interrupted by several spells of unemployment. So that's the earnings point. The spillover, you had the second point, earnings and? Oh, sorry. I was told that I had to be here and I forgot, sorry, I keep going back and forth. You said earnings and then there was another one that I couldn't write down? Anyways, maybe we can...
So it is about the network.
Oh, the network, sorry. Perfect, yes. So, in fact, network spillovers, so again, there is some overlap there. 2 or 3 things to say. First of all, we have very detailed network data in this study. So we have dyadic data mapping the relationship of everybody that is in our sample within a cluster, right? And we also have general questions about networks. So, for example, with how many people do you exchange information about jobs with? How many of these people have jobs, and so on. And so we don't really find any heterogeneity of treatment effects between people who are well connected in job social networks and who aren't. In this study here, and Marc is going to present another set of results. Nor we find effects of treatment on some of these network interactions. So it doesn't seem like these effects are operating by letting people strengthen the job search networks. In terms of spillover, we do 2 things. So we have control individuals in treated clusters, and for the transport treatment only, we do exactly what you suggest. So we randomize the saturation of the cluster. That means that you go from cluster where 20% of the eligible population is treated to cluster where 40%, 70% and 90% of the eligible population is treated. Now I have 15 minutes, so I couldn't present all results. We do find some effects. So we do find, so for example, on the permanent work variable, although the average spillover is 0, so on average there are no spillover of any kind, we actually find some positive spillovers at low cluster saturation levels, and some negative spillovers for the highest, for the 90% saturation level. So that analysis is actually quite telling because it does reveal things that you wouldn't see just by looking at the average spillover. And finally, I just have one thanks. I wanted to thank the discussant for really thoughtful comments. There were very many, so I won't address all of them. I don't see that there is, in a sense, the agenda of making labor markets function more effectively. Making labor markets function more effectively for the poor, in particular, is in competition with the agenda of creating more jobs. In a sense, you could be in a situation, Paolo was talking about inequality in the labor market, where you keep creating jobs, and then the people that you'd want to target, the people that will need those jobs are actually stuck in basically poverty traps because they cannot overcome the constraints of space and information. So that is a very good point. But then ideally, you'd want to be doing these 2 things in tandem. Thank you.
Okay.
Any last questions? Or? Fine.
Thank you, Stefano. We can move to the 3rd presentation then. There to see the presentation.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for staying on until now. I'm a PhD student here at Oxford University, so this is joint work with two former PhD students, Stefano, who's just presented, and Simon Franklin, who's also in the audience. So we're asking the question, do the effects of labor market interventions spill over through social networks, which relates quite nicely to the audience question we just had, and we're using experimental evidence from urban Ethiopia, and unsurprisingly, it's the experimental evidence we've just seen in the previous presentation, so this is building right up on that. Our motivation is kind of that the program evaluation literature mostly focuses on estimating the direct effects on beneficiaries, which obviously makes sense, but non-beneficiaries are arguably often affected as well, especially if they're living close to those people who receive a treatment. So there's a big literature that estimates these, what we call geographical spillover effects. For example, the randomized situation design in your study, Dasterok, the Crepon and Duflo paper. What we're doing is slightly different. We estimate the spillover effects of a labor market intervention through the social networks. We argued that the geographical networks are not the only salient networks that are relevant here, and we do that by combining social network data that spans the whole city of Addis Ababa with a randomized assignment to a job search assistance program. This is the transport subsidy program that we just heard about. Well, just briefly, why do we choose Addis Ababa? It's been growing massively over the past 10 years, and at the same time, the youth unemployment rate is still quite high in the city, more than 30%, and obviously policymakers are interested in how to promote youth employment in this context. We've done some previous work, some of us, that showed that job networks are especially relevant in Ethiopia when it comes to finding jobs in urban and rural contexts. And we've also seen that in some descriptive work I've done before that the salient networks in distributing jobs in Addis are not geographically based, but rather span the whole city. So we want to find out how this treatment kind of permeates through the whole city. So yeah, we should have coordinated this a bit better, but this is the exact same picture you've seen before. But I think it's quite interesting, again, to see these vacancy boards, of which we can find about 4 or 5 in different central locations in Addis Ababa, and people actually looking at these boards. So this is a kind of an anecdote that kind of motivates the idea of the transport subsidy a bit further. Just to give you an idea of exactly what we're doing, so we take the transport subsidy intervention data, and we then select a random sample of individuals in the treatment and the control group. We call these people the seeds, so I'll be referring to those seeds throughout the presentation. Just keep that in mind. Those are the seeds. Then we ask those seeds to list all the people they frequently exchange job information with. We completely list these people, so we have a census of these peers, so these people are then the peers. Of those peers, we randomly sample some of them, and we both sample peers of treated and untreated seeds, and then we compare the outcomes. A sneak preview of what we find, so we find that peers of treated and untreated seeds differ in 3 important dimensions. First of all, overall job search of treated peers, as I call them now, goes down, and the search strategies shift. The peers of treated seeds go to the city center less frequently, and they choose job search strategies that require transportation and travel less intensely. And there's some evidence that there's a shift in the beliefs and attitudes of peers of treated seeds in the way that they become a bit more positive about the control they have over their own life and stuff like that. The effects are driven mainly by peers who work at baseline. I'm not going to show this because due to time constraints, and they're probably not due, we're looking at the mechanisms, due to a shift in the expectations or aspirations that peers of treated seeds have in compared to peers of untreated seeds. Yeah, so I'm just going to continue right away. Stefano has already presented the experiment. Just to briefly repeat, so CSE and EDRI conducted this job search RCT with a transport subsidy treatment and a control group. Maybe the numbers need to be slightly updated, but 800,000 people roughly. The eligibility criteria, I don't know if you stressed that for these main intervention participants were, they had to have at least a high school degree between 18 and 29 years old, and they were not supposed to be in permanent employment. So these people were surveyed with a baseline, April to June 2014. Now, the transport subsidy, as you've said, Stefano, the fact that job information and vacancy information is very centralized in Addis and spatially restricted was one of the rationales. So the subsidy was supposed to finance travels from the participants living in the suburbs to the city center where they could find the vacancy boards. As you said, the subsidy could be picked up to 3 times per week in an office in the city center. So even though it wasn't some sort of conditional subsidy, participants had to incur some sort of expenditure to pick up the money. So, yeah. The amount and the duration differed by participant. The overall treatment period was between October 2014 and February 2015. Yeah, with a median amount of about 20 birr, $1, that is, and a median amount of 16 weeks of treatment between 13 and 20 minimum and maximum. So we've got these treatment and control people, and we ask a random subsample of these people, those seats, about their job contacts. And again, of these job contacts, the peers, we interview a random subsample, and this then forms our intervention group. We have about 600 individuals at baseline of those peers, 300 of treated, 300 of untreated seats. And if you're interested in how exactly we ask the seats about their job context, so the question is basically, with whom in Addis Ababa do you regularly share information about job opportunities, list all the people, and fill in a few information about them. So we did that. Because it can be kind of confusing, this is just an overview. So we've got 165 randomly selected seats, of which 79 are treated and 86 are in the control group. So 79 received the transport subsidy. And then of these treated and control seats, we elicit the peers, and we end up with roughly 300 peers of treated and 300 of untreated seats. Our attrition is 10%, which is non-selective by treatment status, so that's encouraging. And just to give you an example of how this looks like, so this is hopefully not too outdated map of Addis Ababa. The light blue dot there, in this case, is a seat, a treated seat, who received the transportation subsidy. We can see, so if we imagine the center of the city, well, I can't even reach the center, being in the north western corner where the areas get kind of denser. So this person is living quite far away from the city center and receives the transport subsidy. Now this person listed all the peers in the job network, which in this case live quite scattered. Some are living very close to this person, others are living quite far away in the center or beyond that. Now this is a map showing all our seat individuals in Addis Ababa, with the light blue ones being those who received the transportation subsidy, and the grayish ones being those who were in the control group. And now I can overlay these people with all of their peers, and we can see that in blue we have the peers of the treated seats, and in black we have the peers of the untreated seats, and we can see that as opposed to the seats who are not supposed to live in the city center, the peers really come from everywhere in the city and pretty much span all the populated areas of Addis Ababa. And just to give you a flavor of what the data we're looking at looks like. Some stylized facts about these seat-peer relationships. So less than 10% of the peers that we sample are actually residing in the same neighborhood as their seat, which kind of gives weight to our argument that it's not really the geographical networks that matter, but rather something that spans further beyond that. The average distance between peer and seat is about 6 kilometers, with a median of about 2, but this is as the bird flies. So in reality, that means that these dyads probably, these people have to spend roughly half an hour walking from their respective places to each other. We don't really have a full-blown model or theory in this at this point of the paper, but just to give a brief idea, why should we expect spillover effects of the transport subsidy at all? So, as we've seen, the treated seats in the previous presentation, they show more search efforts, so there's high search intensity and efficacy. The peers of the treated seats may adjust their search effort in response. So if search activities are complements, the peers may just simply search harder because they imitate, for example, their seeds' behavior, because they think it's a rivalrous activity and so on. Or if search activities are substitutes, for example, by the seeds sharing information with the peer, they might search less hard. In either way, we can expect a change in the search activities of the peer. As a consequence of these activities, peers of treated seeds may or may not get better information about vacancies, about the state of the labor market in general, about how to apply for jobs and so on. So it's not a priori completely unrealistic that the employment outcomes of peers of treated seeds may also change. Okay, I better hurry up. So what we're doing, we're using an ANCOVA strategy, clustering the standard errors by seeds. So the treatment indicator here is 1 if the seed received the transport subsidy and 0 if he or she did not. Again, some baseline observables about the interaction between peers and seeds. First of all, none of this is statistically significantly different, so that's encouraging. Peers and seeds speak about 12, 13 times in 1 month. They travel, about half the sample travels together to the city center in the last month. And we can see that they're very salient job networks. 82 and 85% of the peers ever received job information from the seed, and 94 to 97% ever gave job information to the seed, and half of the sample also exchanged money in some sort. All these things are not statistically different at baseline. And then we checked the balance of a lot of outcomes. As we would expect, we found some imbalances for which we control in our regressions. And then let me jump straight into the results, which are kind of still under construction, so take these with a grain of salt, but we think we find something interesting here. So this is our headline slide. The question is, do treated peers search more? And the answer is no. Treated peers of treated seeds definitely display less search behavior, both in terms of overall job search and in blue, and job search at the vacancy boards in red. The confidence interval here is 95%. And this, for example, the decrease in 10%, well, in 0.1, in 10 percentage points in the blue bar, that's over a mean of the control group of 30%. So that's a decrease in about a third, so which is quite big, I guess. Yeah, this is so we find that treated peers actually search less than peers of untreated seeds. And if we look at this in a bit more detail, if we look at the search strategies, we find kind of varying effects. We find mostly negative, partly significant effects on search, and this is especially relevant for job search that involves travel. So as I've said before, the search at the job boards goes down significantly, but also in yellow and green here, the search at job agencies, which are mostly located in the center, and the search at central locations, strategic locations on streets, which also happens to be in the center a lot, goes down significantly. Whereas we can't find any effects on search at work sites, that's for casual labor mainly, and search in the internet. Some people do that too. Again, to dig a bit deeper into the mechanisms, we look whether this might in some way be explained by the expectations or aspirations that the peers of treated seeds might have, because they get differential information about the state of the job market in others as compared to those peers who have no treated friends. Basically, what we can't see any effects here. So we can see that the aspired and the reservation wages go down, but none of this is significant, and neither statistically nor economically. And there's some indication that life satisfaction goes up, but on a 10-point scale it goes up by 0.2, so that's also not really meaningful. We take this as indicative that the mechanism driving the differential behavior between treated and untreated peers is not lying within the realm of aspirations or expectations. If then again, if we look into more general beliefs and outlooks of lives of peers, there's some sort of story emerging here which kind of shows that the overall, I think one way of putting this, the feeling of locus of control, or being in control of one's own life, seems to increase for those peers whose seats were treated, as opposed to those peers whose seats were not treated. So I think the avenue we want to go down with is flesh this out a bit more in more detail, but there seems to be something going on here. But over a range of variables that kind of ask for for these beliefs in a variety of ways. We find the story emerging that people seem to be more aware of the control they have of their lives, and they feel more comfortable. I've showed you that at baseline the interaction between peers and seeds were kind of balanced. Now these are the same variables at endline, so whether peer and seeds spend time with each other, travel to the center together, shared the travel costs, and so on. Interestingly, both the variables that show the informational exchange between peer and seeds, so the light green and the red one, are not significantly different. So it seems that treated seeds did not pass on more information about job opportunities to their peers than untreated seeds, which is kind of different, interesting, because that would have been the most obvious channel we would have assumed a priori. What we do find is that the travel of peers and seeds to the center together goes down slightly, not significantly, and interestingly, travel costs in case they travel together are shared less between those seeds and peers where the seeds got the subsidy, so which is kind of counterintuitive and still something we have to look deeper into, I guess. Lastly, I was interested in seeing how the distance in the location between the seed and the peer affected our results, and so in the X scale we've got the aerial distance between the residence of the peer and the seeds, and it seems in some way counteracting our own story that some of the effects are more strongly driven by peers and seeds that live closer together, but I wouldn't make too much out of this at this point because again the trajectories are quite horizontal. Yeah, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to briefly refer to this. So we did not only look at search outcomes, but a variety of indicators. I think employment outcomes would be the most interesting at this point. Here we can't find any significant differences, but what we find at least economically meaningful increase of about 4 percentage points in wage employment of peers of untreated seeds, and some indication that the work satisfaction rises as well. And we looked at many other outcomes. You see the links up there. We do not find differences across these indicators. Yeah, and this is work in progress. So we're going to look in more detail about the informational exchange about the vacancies that took place between treated and untreated seeds and peers. Just to wrap up briefly, so yeah, we estimate the spillover effects of the randomized transport subsidy in Addis Ababa. We find that there are 3 dimensions in which treated and untreated peers differ. So it's the overall job search that goes down. It's the job search strategies that shift towards less travel-intensive job search. And then there's this evidence of a positive shift in beliefs and attitudes of the peers of the treated seeds. And again, I haven't shown this to you, but again, this is mostly driven by peers who already work at baseline and probably not due to a shift in expectations about the labor market. Thank you very much.
Okay, so this is a very good paper, and I really enjoyed reading it. I think it's got a very, it's got great potential, and I think that's mainly because it answers not only an interesting, but also what I find to be a very policy-relevant question, which is, are the effects of a randomized control trial that attempted to improve the employment prospects of Ethiopian youth amplified or dampened by social networks? And that is something, that policymakers and people who are interested in this policy and its effects will very much want to know. And, I think that the paper does a good job at, highlighting this as its main contribution. And I think, perhaps it could be highlighted even more, but I think it's clear. Now, my comments. The first one is about pitching your results. So the main question I was asking myself as I was reading this paper is the result good news or bad news? How do we interpret this? I mean, I seem to read it as I go through the paper as some kind of, I feel the paper gives a sense that it's, the interpretation seems to be that it's not necessarily a good outcome, that people search less after, their peers have been treated, because you'd expect this intervention to increase search and maybe increase it even through the networks even more. But I wonder if that's indeed what we should expect. Maybe if information is a public good to some extent, and your friends are searching, you don't need to search as well. So it's to be expected, this is what happens. In fact, I wonder if the more relevant dimensions to look at are the ones that you showed us towards the end. So, exploring more, and earlier on in the paper, dimensions like, do you work permanently, do you work in wage employment, and therefore see if it's that dimension that is affected, and if not, then, it's still interesting. I mean, it's still a result, the intervention may not have effects beyond, what beyond the treated people, but I think perhaps it's those margins that you might want to use in order to tell us how we should interpret these results. The second one is about size. So are these results large or small? So can we put some sense on this as to whether these are large magnitudes, and for instance, if indeed the results that you find is on search, and we know that there is a relationship between searching and finding a job, how is the change that you are inducing likely to translate into a change in employment outcomes, which is ultimately what we might care about. And then I have a couple of minor points that are more technical. One is about multiple hypothesis testing. I was wondering, if you should introduce that at some point. And then I was wondering also about issues of power and attrition. I'm mainly going to dwell on the first one. I was wondering whether some of these hypotheses, with the kind of samples that you had, whether the sample that you have has sufficient power to test some of these hypotheses. In the event that you might want to go down the line of documenting some of these results, even if sometimes they don't show a significant impact, you might want to go down that route. It might help you in some cases to figure out whether you should expect to find the result or you should not. I think maybe going along those lines. I think I'll keep it to that in the interest of the discussion. Maybe we take some questions before we answer the comments. Marcel.
I have a narrative, I think I have a narrative that might fit a lot of the facts you find, and it would be really useful if you can try to falsify this narrative. So this is a narrative. You go to the original population, they're all job seekers. You ask them, who are the friends or the people you talk to about jobs? If you ask me this question when I was unemployed, I would probably cite people who were employed, because they are the people who are, effective, more successful in finding a job than I am. So that's what you seem to find, that the people they are citing tend to be in a job. Now, if they are in a job and they are searching from the boards and all that, they may be searching for me. I'm enlisting their help. They're going to the board, helping me search. So now, Oxford comes along and gives me money to search myself. My friend says, "Oh, great! I don't have to do all this extra work for him. He's going to do it himself." That's why they share less of the cost of traveling. The friends don't go to the boards. There's no effect on. They're happier because they don't have to do all this extra work for you. So I'm just trying. It would be useful to see if you can falsify or test that narrative.
Sorry, thank you for the presentation. I know that you skimmed over this slide where you solicited the network of the peers, but there's research spanning quite a, Granovetter, et cetera, showing the importance of weak ties in the job search process. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how you might think about whether these ties that you're soliciting from them are actually the right ones who are relevant in the job search process.
There's another question I might just mention the very last point, just for the sake of clarifying, so that, in case we don't have a chance to speak again. What I could not understand from the paper is whether, you document attrition at different points, but I was wondering, how was attrition going from presumably a list of seeds that you identified and the seeds that you actually interviewed? Because you have that 165 number, where that presumably was the result already of some kind of selection process. You know, presumably you lost a couple, and I was wondering whether that would need to be documented as well. I'm not sure it is, because because at some point you do say that there are some differences at baseline, and I was wondering whether that might be the source of some of those, the fact that some of the people that you meant to interview were lost. Anyway, that's a fairly minor point.
Yeah, I'm going to start with this point actually. So the seeds, all of them are part of the main intervention sample, so they either receive or don't receive the subsidy, and they're, as Stefano said, being called roughly every 2 weeks. So I don't have the numbers right here, I can check it, but as far as I remember, we did not have a lot of problem reaching these people because they were engaged with a different arm basically of
So
the
the
project.
165 is the random sample that you wanted to interview for this particular intervention?
Yes.
All of them? You
What
just
do
drew a random sample?
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. Right, Marcel, to your point, I think in a way I'm able to falsify that story because your argument is that first of all, the seats, all of them are not in permanent employment because that was an eligibility criterion. The peers, we did not restrict them to have to fulfill these criteria. So, and as I've said, the results kind of stronger for peers who do work at baseline. To falsify the story that it's just, the peers that were initially always looking for their seats for job information, but then just stopped doing that when the seat got his or her own money to do that. I can do that by looking essentially whether the peer at baseline works in a place that is close to the city center, where we would maybe be able to assume that he could combine travel to work with getting this job information anyway, because it's just around the corner, something like that. This is the first ad hoc solution I have, but but otherwise it sounds like a plausible story, maybe. Yeah, I have to think about how to falsify this, and obviously Stefano and Simon add anything at any point. And then about the network elicitation, I mean, our argument is that exactly that these are the right people, that it's not people, you just happen to live next to that are the relevant people with whom you share job information, but it's exactly the people that you can list from an unrestricted space, as in this case Addis Ababa. So we ask those seats to list from their perspective those who are relevant for job search. So I guess we're looking at some sort of strong ties here. I don't know if that was what you were getting at. Yeah. And I don't know how we're standing with time, but
I think pretty well. I think we're right on. Yeah, I think.
Any other questions?
Can take one more if you want, otherwise we move on. Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just okay.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Engida, as I said, and I work for Dilla University. Currently, I am PhD candidate at Addis Ababa University, specializing in socio-economic development policy and planning. So, what I am going to present is patterns of structural change in the economy of major urban centers in Ethiopia. So I will follow this outline. I will talk about the background and then introduce the objectives, and then again briefly discuss about method, results, conclusion, and recommendation to implications. To begin with, the purpose for which cities exist is important. So urban centers, be it city or a town of any size, they exist to provide functions. therefore cities exist to provide functions, then what are functions? Urban functions refer to goods and services provided by a city or a region or a country for the city population or for the surrounding population or abroad. So by virtue of functions, cities could be classified as like commercial towns, administrative headquarters, mining towns, manufacturing towns, centers of communication, storage and transfer, education, and the like. The most important fact is every city has its economic base, and without which a city cannot exist. So it is important for the existence of cities and towns. Therefore, these functions could be classified into two: the one which brings income into the city, the one which satisfies the local demand. So a function could be basic and non-basic. So basic functions mean city-forming functions, functions that help inject income from outside into the city so that the city could benefit more. The other one is non-basic or city-serving functions. These kind of functions are just for satisfying the local demand only. Excess is not exported out of the city, therefore it focuses on satisfying the urban population only. So a city may have one function, predominantly one function, or two, or three, or four, even it may be more than that. So some cities may have unifunctional, some may have multi-functional. When we come to Ethiopia, Ethiopia is predominantly a rural country. When we see the statistics, the urban population is yet not more than 20%. The recent report indicates that it is about 19%. Cities play a significant role in the GDP. A recent report again by the World Bank indicates that cities account for about close to 40% of the GDP. Therefore, understanding the economic basis of cities is quite relevant for countries like Ethiopia. So that may help formulate strategies to make informed decisions, to monitor the economy so that the desirable impact will happen. To this end, I used simple techniques. One is standard deviation, the other one is economic base and shift share analysis techniques. I will speak briefly about this later. So the objective, the major objective is to identify changes that have been taking place in the functional composition of major urban centers. Because they are dynamic, they need to be monitored, they need to be analyzed on continual basis so that people will be updated. Authorities managing the city may have up-to-date information so that they may make proper decisions. So specific objectives, identifying the basic and non-basic sectors, one. The other one is assessing the urban centers' overall performance relative to other urban centers, and identifying industries that are performing better in major urban centers, and again, those which are expanding and declining, just simply to identify this. So the method, the source of the data is entirely based on Urban Employment Unemployment Survey. Two surveys, 2009 and 2012, I wrote this paper in 2012 for PhD seminar at Addis Ababa University for a course known as Urban and Regional Development Planning. So in this survey, the survey covers employed population of urban areas aged 10 and above by major industrial divisions. This is taken as it is. The cities included are 15 major urban centers as they are included in the survey. Mekele, Asaita, Gondar, Dese, Bahar Dar, Bishoftu, Adama, Jimma, Jigjiga, Asosa, Hawassa, Gambella, Harar, Addis Ababa, and Dredhawa. So the Bezir and Indir are 2009 and 2012. So when I come to the standard deviation analysis, so cities having population between 50,000 to 300,000, more or less, are included in this analysis. I deliberately excluded Addis to avoid primacy effect and avoided some cities having very low urban population. And these activities were aggregated. Primary activities like agriculture, hunting, fishing, and the like were put together as primary activities. The second group, manufacturing and construction. Then essential services, business and financial services, hotel and transport services, administrative and defense services. These are the aggregated functions. So the standard deviation was calculated, mean calculated, and then the idea is where a given function lies maybe in the mean plus 1 standard deviation region, plus 2 SD region, or plus 3 or more. So this is the computation. So the mean, the standard deviation is computed, and also when we add mean plus SD, these are the values. On the basis of this, cities are classified. So the other one is location quotient. This is another simple techniques that help understand the local economy, the regional economy, or the urban economy. And it is simply the ratio of local employment to the national employment in a given sector. And the basic idea behind this is when location quotient value is greater than 1, it is said to be basic. The service is basic one, that which brings income from abroad, or that which help us to export abroad. The other one is when location quotient is less than 1. So it is non-basic. When it is 1, it is self-sufficient. So if a city has a location quotient value more than 1 in many sectors, then that city is multifunctional. If it has only 1, then only single function is basic employment. This is a way computed for Mekele, and so mining and quarrying and and manufacturing are dominantly basic sectors. Others are predominantly local. So in similar fashion, for all cities, this method applied and computation was made following similar procedures. The other issue is computing basic employment multiplier, basic employment. The idea is when one person is employed in basic sector, because it has multiplier effect, it is expected to create 2 or 3 or 5 or more employment in non-basic sector. The idea is the ratio to the best is expected to be 1 to 1, that is the best. Otherwise, 1 to 2, again, it is better. But when the ratio is less than that, it is not appreciated. Therefore, basic employment is computed following this procedure. The third method, all right, is shift share analysis. Shift share analysis helps to decompose the economy into three components. One, national growth effect, industry mix effect, and competitive share effect. The total change in the economy or total employment change is the sum total of these three elements. So this is a procedure followed to compute shift share analysis. This is a practical example which is computed for Mekelle. And following the same procedure again, I computed for all the rest. So, results. Functional specialization and diversification. So we have services. Again, we have cities put to the left, to the right, mean whether they lie in mean plus 1 standard deviation, mean plus 2 standard deviation, or mean plus 3 standard deviation. So we see many cities lie in mean plus 1 standard deviation. That means many cities have location quotient values. When we add to the mean the standard deviation, simply they lie in this region. That is, that function is not as such predominant. We see many here, but when we go to plus 2, plus 3, we see less number of cities. The other is, as I said, basic non-basic ratio is computed for 2 years, 2009 and 2012, and as I said, it varies. However, the larger the size of the city, the gap is wider. The gap between basic and non-basic employment is wider. So the other one is functional change based on location quotient, classifying cities into 3 groups. One, leading urban regions, cities of leading regions and urban regions. The second group, cities, provincial capitals. The third one, towns of emerging regions. So urban region, we have 3 towns, Harar, Dredao, and Addis, which have the urban population over 50 or 60% is urban. That's why it is said to be urban region. Leading regions are 4, basically. In terms of socio-economic development, they are better than others. South Tigray, Amhara, and Oromia are leading regions. And emerging regions are those who lag behind. This include Somali, Afar, Benishangul, and Gambela regions. Therefore, this is a classification. So what we can understand from this is location quotient computed for 2 different years, and the order, in terms of order of importance, it is put, and the order in many cases changed. That shows the dynamics. The most important sector, basic sector, is changed later in 2012. Therefore, that is showing the dynamics. The same is true here, except for Jimma. Jimma is a city in southwest Ethiopia. In 2009 and 12, there is no change in the order of basic sectors. In emerging regions, here, primary services are predominant, like agriculture is the most important one, and other services are most important, including public administration and defense. So the other issue is shift share analysis. I computed here for only 2, for manufacturing and construction, because the policy in Ethiopia supports or encourages manufacturing. Therefore, I wanted to see whether there is change in this area. Therefore, I computed shift share analysis for these cities, and the national growth effect, the industry mix effect, the competitive share effect is also computed, and the total shift in the economy is also computed. So when we see in terms of manufacturing, Mekelle has performed well, followed by Hawassa in southern Ethiopia. Others somehow performed relatively better, but in some cases we can see negative values. All right? Okay, a couple of 2 minutes. One, okay. Construction, we see here again many positive change, and Addis is dominant, 60%, followed by Mekele, and others have varied values. So the other issue is scenario. 4 kind of scenario can be obtained based on shift share analysis. Cities could be expanding nationally and locally, expanding nationally but declining locally, declining nationally but expanding locally, or declining nationally and locally based on shift share and competitive share and industry mix effect values. So let me go to the conclusion, I think. That captures, I think, the whole thing. Well, what we can observe from the analysis is urban centers in Ethiopia are becoming more and more multi-functional or functionally diversified, which is expected. The other trend is the larger the size of the population, the higher the tendency for urban centers to be multifunctional. This is another observation. However, the problem is the relative position of transformative industries like manufacturing. Manufacturing is not the basic, the first or the prime basic sector in most cities. That's why the policy is to push in this regard. The other area is observation is extractive activities, social services, distributive activities, public administration defense play major role as basic employers in many cities considered in the analysis. So among secondary, transformative industries, construction appears to be booming. Okay, Ethiopia is under construction, therefore this appears to be employing more. And some towns relatively shown better performance in terms of competitive advantage, probably in manufacturing, construction, and other sectors than others included, like the typical ones include Mekele and Hawassa. So they might have better competitive share effect, and that might require further investigation into that as to the reasons that contributed a lot to make this to be in the forefront. Well, in general, to understand the urban economy, the local economy, continuous investigation, analysis of this kind is needed. The other issue is other sector, other social and economic services is important, and so this has to be reclassified in the surveys. And therefore, understanding the urban economy might help make better decisions that help grow the urban centers. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Engida, for this very interesting and very detailed analysis of the structural composition and the structural change of formal employment in Ethiopia from 2009 to 2012. Just to briefly repeat what you said, it builds on the economic base theory and use these location quotient, LQ, and shift share analysis methods. The most interesting findings for me were that the share of employment in construction increases nationally and in most cities, whereas the share of employment in manufacturing actually decreases nationally, but how some cities actually manage to go against this trend and increase their employment share in manufacturing. Also, you find that the employment share in distributive, social, and extractive services increases most strongly, and it would be interesting to find out a bit more what exactly includes all these distributive and social services in particular. Just to connect this to the bigger picture, when I read your paper, my first thought was, why is all of this happening? So you document the structural changes very meticulously and in great detail. It would be nice if you could just maybe just descriptively tell a bit about the mechanisms in place? Why do we find the employment shares in some cities change so drastically, whereas in others there's basically no change over these 3 or 4 years? Another point, you mentioned that briefly at the end of your presentation. What does this paper tell us about policy? So are there any specific sectors that have different implications for overall growth? For example, it seems to be the case that you always stress the importance of manufacturing for overall growth in Ethiopia. It would be nice to find out basically a bit more about these different sectors that you're looking at, and what then in turn can be done to increase their respective employment share throughout the country. One thing I was wondering, now you look at formal employment numbers, do you have any further data on labor productivity and anything that goes beyond purely formal employment? It would be really nice to see something like that. And just to wrap up my last slide, a few open questions that I was left with at the end. What is happening at the against the trend cases? So places where a nationally declining industry expands locally or vice versa. So these are the really interesting cases, I thought. What are the potential caveats of the data that you use? So you're just looking at formal employment, but I'm sure that some sectors are really dominated by a lot of informality. And thirdly, it would be nice if you could, I've already said that, a bit more intuition about what these different patterns of structural changes mean for the future development of these cities. Thank you very much.
Take some more, any other questions that there might be before you address the discussants' comments?
There's some askance and I have to answer all of them together.
That's okay for you?
Yeah, it's okay.
Is there any other questions, in fact?
Thank you for the excellent presentation. I mean, I live there, I see this cities growing, but I didn't put system on them to see what's going on behind them, behind this growth, and many foreigners come to Ethiopia and ask me, what is the source of growth? I mean, what is the source of money? Anyway, it's difficult to explain, but coming to the conclusion, you say that Mekelle and Hawassa, in the area of manufacturing. So, as an economist, I would be expecting Adama or Bishoftu to have that comparative advantage of markets and manufacturing. I mean, is it a policy issue? Why Mekelle has a potential, which has a distance of 700 kilometers from Addis, while Adama, I was expecting these towns around Addis to have a potential growth in terms of manufacturing and others. Now I see your result shows Hawassa and Mekelle. So I don't know, is it a policy issue behind it or any other rationale? Thank you.
Any other questions? Stefano.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation. Just a quick question on the choice of years. Do I understand correctly that it was 2009, 2012? And if so, in a sense, I was wondering, well, those were years of growth in Ethiopia that just occurred after the financial meltdown of the OECD world and whatnot. Maybe to really get at some of the structural transformation trends that you want to capture, you want to look at a larger period. So something pre-2005, before growth really picked up in Ethiopia, and then 2012, for example. So my question is about the choice of years.
So I think in this data set you should have data on migration and what proportion of the labor force are migrants, and I wondered if it would be interesting to look at which cities are having more migrants, which industries are driving migration to the city. This boom in construction in Addis Ababa, is that just leading to some migration in this setting? Given that there's such low urbanization rates in Ethiopia, can we learn something from this about the constraints to that?
Okay, Thank you very much. I have to reflect on some of the issues. Let me start with Dr. Woldai Ammaha's question. Why do these two cities come in the forefront in terms of competitive share? This is a problem with statistics, the data. When I calculate the data, surprisingly, the data showed as I presented. Why? Actually, that may need further investigation. It may be the environment, the policy environment, the institutional environment, in some cases encouraging environment, in some cases discouraging environment might be there when we compare regions, different regions. So it may not necessarily the same in all regions. That may create variations. But when we come to areas surrounding Addis, like Bishoftu, Bishoftu relatively has better performed when we compare with others in terms of manufacturing. I was not in a position to present the whole thing. If you see the whole document, you can see this thing. But yeah, that is the way. So whether it is policy issue or institutional issue or other issue, based on this analysis, somebody may carry out the detailed collecting data and then make analysis and then find the answers for these kind of questions. So what are the mechanisms in place? Why does employment change in some cities, etc.? Yeah, this might be seen within the broader framework of maybe employment policies, poverty reduction policies, and the like. This method is basically used in one way to inform policymakers on basically it is used to monitor the urban economy. Just you compute, you see the progress, and then whenever necessary you have to make some kind of decision, intervention, like where to prioritize, what to encourage, what to discourage. So on continual basis, this kind of analysis need to be made so that people, decision makers, should be well informed so that they could make evidence-based decision. That is just simply the issue. I was not clear about this structural transformation in 2009-12. Anyways, I deliberately selected these 2 years because when in 2012, I was a first-year PhD candidate in Addis Ababa University. We are required to write a paper. So I chose these 2 dates, 2 years, because data compatibility. So I wanted to have base year and end year. Therefore, I need to have similar data in both years. So I simply selected this one. Probably, as you said, I may connect to other important issues that help explain better. Okay, thank you very much. This is all I have for you.
Thank you everyone for coming. This concludes the session. Thank you.